Hello dear viewers, it's Aziza Karaeva and you are watching us on TV channel Tourism and Folklore. And today we have a guest, an American visionary and author of 142 new theories and visions in 176 scholarly books and numerous articles as of June 2022, Dr. Peter Baofu. And it should be noted that Dr. Baofu writes articles to provide a visionary challenge to conventional wisdoms in all fields of knowledge, in social science, in formal science, natural and humanities, with the aim for unified theories of everything together, with numerous visions of future histories in relations to the mind, nature, society and culture. Mr. Baofu, welcome once again to our TV channel and to Tajikistan.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Baofu, it's a pleasure to having you in our TV channel. So, can you tell us what prompted you to work in a field of post-human spheres?
Well, that is a long story. To cut that short, ever since I was a kid, I always want to understand humanity and try to understand the future of human civilization. But at that time when I was a kid, I did not understand much of anything. But the drive was always there. So when I finished my degree, and I always want to understand what the future is. So the more I look into the future, the most I come to realize that one of the theories that I have proposed so far is post-humanity, which is that human beings like you and me will not exist anymore. It will become extinct. And that's very shocking to people for me to propose something like that. And that's only one vision of mine. I have proposed more than 142 different visions about the human future in all fields of knowledge. So post-humanity is one of them. And so that's why I become so much interested in that. And I have engaged a global tour around the world. And I have been in about 120 different countries by now. So I did that on purpose because I want to understand humanity on the ground, not just by reading a book or talking to people.
Traveled in a lot of countries. So, what can you tell about our country, about Tajikistan?
Well, that is also a very interesting question, but also a big question too, because Tajikistan is not just one country; it's part of Central Asia, which is in turn part of Eurasia. So that's a lot of issues which are involved. So that is certainly a very important point to start with. In the case of Tajikistan, we can talk about so many different things about natural resources, about cultural heritage, about geopolitics, about economic development. I mean, there are so many other issues, but they are very important to focus on. I hope that maybe we can address some of these in this conversation and interview.
So, you have some articles about hospitality.
Yes.
What can you tell about the culture and hospitality here?
I think that I have written many books, and a few of them has been on tourism and natural resources and cultural resources. Why do I do that? Because each country is beautiful in a certain way, and it attracts tourists in a certain way. So in the case of Tajikistan, for example, the cultural heritage, the Silk Road history, that is a big attraction here. And also the natural resources, nature, mountains. I think Central Asia is very well known for the mountains that you have. So yeah, those are the natural and the cultural landscapes which are very important for tourism, for example. I think that most of the tourists are here because of these two attractions. Bukhara, by the way, is a good example. That is more or less the center of the ancient Silk Road, and the mountains, the nature is another attraction. So I think that's a good example of some of the attractions which have attracted a lot of tourists coming over here.
So, Mr. Baofu, what can you tell for the new journalists? Yes, what should they do to start writing to start being good in their profession, especially in the sphere of journalism, as to write some articles in the sphere of tourism. Yes, it's because our authority is looking, watching more about tourism and folk crafts. What can you offer them?
I think there are two questions in that question, which are also value-laden. I think the first question in the question is about whether tourism is a good thing to pursue. But I think that part of the question is to imply that it is, but it may not be. And the second question in the question is to ask if it is, what can be done to improve tourism as in this country, including the journalists who spend their life and career on this kind of topic. So we can talk about these two questions individually, but just to answer very quickly about the issue of journalists in relation to the question, assuming that tourism is a good thing to do. I think there are several things which come to my mind because I have written a lot and I've also written some books on writing too. And on journalism, I have another book on journalism too. I think that some of the things which can be proposed to improve the journalistic quality in Tajikistan is number one is scholarship, independent scholarship. I think that quite a number of journalists nowadays, when they write about something, they are not independent. They are paid for and sponsored by different organizations. The viewpoint is often not very objective and correct, and that can impact on the quality of journalism over here. So I think that is certainly one very important thing to consider. The second thing is about the knowledge and the education of the journalists over here, which are not very high because of the educational system here, which is not comparable to the, let's say, the top schools in the world. I went to the top school too. So I know that the quality and the education and the knowledge here can be very limited, and that had a negative impact on the scholarship. So I think that these are probably the two most important thing to consider for any journalist to write about tourism in this country. Let me repeat them. Number one is the independent scholarship, unbiased. In real life, in many cases, they are quite biased. And number two, the quality in terms of knowledge and education. They don't have that because many of them, by the way, also have not been outside the country or outside Central Asia. They are located primarily in this region, so your understanding of the world is very limited. I have the good fortune, maybe also bad fortune too, to be around the world in 120 different countries, and there's a lot, and I've seen a lot of things, but before I have done that, I realized at that time, before, that I was also like that. I have gone through that, and I know how much it can enrich your life and your work. So these are my two advices.
Several years ago, our president, had an initiative in the UN to declare International Decade for Action Water for Sustainable Development in 2018 till 2028. From 6th till 9th of June this year, in Dushanbe was held a conference dedicated to this conference, and it helps us to have guests from about 100 countries and about 2,500 visitors, yes, participants in these conferences, and it gave the big impetus to Tajikistan to attract a lot of tourists to come here because we have a lot of resources. In a framework of the conference, our guests, they visited some tourist points, Baofu, Barzov, Hisor, and Norak, hydroelectric power stations. And what about you? How do you think? What else can we do to attract tourists and develop this sphere?
I think there are not just the two questions that I just mentioned, but also two issues over here, which are also related, especially about the conference that you just mentioned and the initiative. one question, one issue is about tourism, the other issue is about water, as you just mentioned at the conference. And then you have two questions. So let me combine them together and make it easier. I think that the larger context of the question and issue has to be addressed. The larger issue about development, by the way, that's also another point too. So let's talk about the first question first, and also the first issue first, if you like, about, let's say, water supply. It's also related to tourism too. First, we have to understand it is desirable to have more water supply. Why? Because it is desirable, then the next question is, what should we do to pursue that? If it's not that desirable, then the next question is, what should we do to reduce that, to stop that? But in order to understand the first question, then you have to understand what are the roots of that demand for water supply. This is not just a problem in Central Asia and Tajikistan. That is a major problem in many other countries around the world that I have visited. You go to Africa, the problem is even worse. So water supply over here, what are the roots of the problem? Well, there are many common problems. Number one is increased population. You have more population now than you had, let's say, 20 years ago. The second problem is about urbanization. Now more and more people move to the city instead of living in the villages. So that put a burden on the economy and nature to fit in all these people, and we have to house them, and then the water supply has to be increased to accommodate them. And then you have to question about effective or ineffective use of the water supply that you have. So think about that. Is that necessarily good for you to have increased water supply for this? Then you have to go to the roots of this problem. Do you think that more population is good? There's a question of whether you want to have more population. Not necessarily so, because people disagree on that. Some people say that too much population is not good. Look at China. China has population control. Do you know that? In the last few decades, recently they abandoned that, but I'm talking about, there's a good example. Some other countries have population control. So you look into the longer term, why are they so concerned about overpopulation or increased population? Is that necessarily a good thing? Secondly, urbanization. Is urbanization necessarily a good thing on the environment? You put a burden on the environment. Land, by the way, have to be used now to expand the city, to house more people. So you might ask the question, is that sustainable? Now, the question of sustainability not become the issue. So if you answer the question and say, yes, it is sustainable, that's a good thing, then the next question is, what should you do to increase water supply, to do all of this? But on the other hand, if you say, no, it's not necessarily good, then you question the very assumption of the question. Is that maybe increased water supply is not the long-term solution to the problem of sustainability. So it depends which way we go. I can go either way. Let's go to the first way first. Let's talk about yes, assuming that it is, what can be done? I think that a lot of things can be done over here, international and domestic. Domestic, by the way, we also have to understand the problem too. Here in Tajikistan and also in Central Asia, the use of water supply is not very efficient. It's not very effective. Let me give you one example. I walked around the street a few days ago, and I saw some trucks. They use the trucks to clean the street, okay, and to water the trees. Yeah. Now, they stop at the corner of the street, and there is a hose. There's a pipe. So they have a key or something to open it, and the water will come out, and they upload the water into the truck. When it's full, they shut off the pipe, and then they continue. But the problem is that when I pay attention, that it's not very efficient because it's leaking. The pipe is leaking. Every day, 24 hours a day, and the water is coming out like this. Now, that is a waste of water. When you are talking about a country which suffers from water shortage, and you wait water like this, but the leaking is not just for 1 minute. We're talking about 24 hours a day. The water comes to leak from the pipe. You see, it's like there's only one location. I'm sure that if you see this in the city center, the capital of the country, I'm sure that you will see more in some of the areas too when they are not that developed. That's a good example of this not, and the equipments are very old.
Yes.
And when they are old, that means that the repair and the maintenance is going to be more costly. So you need to invest more into the infrastructure. Now the next question is, where's the money? You invest, you cannot just say, yes, we want more. How are you going to pay for it? That is a question here. So now we go into the question about economics. Well, there are some solutions to that. I can talk about the solution. Internationally, Tajikistan, Central Asia have been receiving a lot of foreign aid. The United Nations, the EU, China, and all these kind of NGOs and all that, they have been funding some of these water supply projects, including the conference that you just mentioned, the United Nations too. So they have some international funding, but they are not sufficient. But on the other hand, that is also related to the question of development. I think that's more important to attract foreign investment instead of asking foreign donation, because foreign donation is never sufficient. They never give you what you want anyway, but foreign investment can be a useful source. And in this case, I can see now, everywhere you go now, you see a lot of Chinese projects. Because China now is a dominant economy. They are the driving engine of economic growth in the region. So maybe that is one of the solutions to the question, because many of the buildings, roads, projects here, and many of them are from China now. They are funding all of this investment. So I'm sure that some of them can be funded by them, but you have to attract them. I just give you some examples, but there are also some other problems too about water supply in terms of governance, which is also not very effective, and there are corruption too, by the way. And Tajikistan has been ranked among the lowest. You see that? So these are some of the issues which are not necessary for water supply, but is related to water supply in the end.
A big difference in this.
Yes, exactly. And then, so this is some of the issues that we can address. But I think that they have been making some progress on that. But I also want to warn you not to be over optimistic. Why? Because as long as you pursue the growth of population, you pursue urbanization, this problem is going to be a major burden on water supply. And by the way, I also have yet mentioned about the natural causes which have nothing to do with you, with the government, which are about nature. Each year in Central Asia and also in South Asia too, in Southeast Asia, you have a lot of floods. Sometimes you have droughts. Now that you have a climate change, it disrupts the natural rhythm of nature, and that has a negative impact on water supply too. Look at all these floods. Sometimes it destroys the local villages, they increase the mud flows, for example. And you have a lot of different problems causing the disruption of the local water supply. And droughts is another problem too. And it's not, and you have the monsoon here in Central Asia and also in South Asia and Southeast Asia too. That is also a major problem. But that's natural causes, it's not human causes. But now you have the climate change. Part of that is because of human industrialization, especially by the more advanced countries. They have been polluting the earth. Yeah. And now it affecting the entire planet Earth. Now the climate change is affecting everyone. Yes, exactly. Yes. Now you see that all of this now they are linked together, even though they are not caused by Tajikistan. But other countries have been causing this. Now it starts affecting Tajikistan too. Everything now become global. They link together. So to address the issue, you have to address all of them. And by the way, I have not yet addressed whether it is not sustainable at all. There's another question we can talk about later, but let's focus about this one first.
I don't know, will they put it to the ear?
Yeah, I do have some hope about that. I do think that the government has been doing some works on that. The conferences that you mentioned, the initiatives. I also noticed that Tajikistan has been proposing different initiatives over time. It's not now, even in the past decades or so. But progress has been slow because of all these problems that I just mentioned. Some of them are not caused by you, some of them are external, some of them are internal. So we have to have a more balanced analysis of that. External, there's not much you can do about it because Tajikistan is a small country, it's a poor country. So when external powers, they have done all this, look at climate change and pollution and all that. And much of that has been caused by advanced countries in the last 300 years because of industrialization. So it had nothing to do with you, it did not cause that. But even though it started 300 years ago, but the effect after 700 years now, it accumulates to the point now we have a major problem like climate change. Even though that's human cause, not you, not by you, not by your country, but it's external, but now it starts affecting you too. Even in the US now, in some cities now, they have extreme heat or extreme cold. Why? Because of climate change now. It starts affecting, now you have the melting of the ice in the Arctic. All of this have consequences to flooding, to the increased water supply, or it affect other regions geographically. It doesn't have to be either this way, it can go both ways.
So, why did Tajikistan have an initiative to help with the global problem, the water problem, because of the amount of the springs, rivers, and the hydropower tanks, problem and work? And what do you think in what another global problems can Tajikistan can help to solve them?
This is just the question which I mentioned a while ago, but in a different fashion. There are several things that they can do. Number one, for example, externally, I talk about, let's say, foreign investment, and the second one is about the foreign aid by the United Nations, by the EU, by the US, by China, by many other agencies, the NGOs and all that. They have been coming in already in Tajikistan, and not just that, but also in Central Asia. So those are the two major components, and I should mention more about the first component, which is about the foreign investment. I think that can help you more in the longer term. And I do think, again, that you can just walk around you in the city in Dushanbe over here. You can see that more and more the Chinese projects are coming in, and they will have a more direct impact on the local development in the longer term than any other sources. So when we look into any analysis, we have to look into which one is the major one, which one are the minor ones. And in the case of the foreign investment by China, that's going to be a major one, not a minor issue there. So I think that is going to affect in a fundamental way. And the next question is how are you going to attract Chinese investment, and how are you going to negotiate with them such that it can benefit them, but it can also benefit you. Like if you are too tough in your negotiation and ask them to do this and this and this, then they have no incentive to come here to invest because they don't give them much of anything. But on the other hand, if you are too loose, then you may not be able to maximize your own advantage, so you have to balance out. I think that's a very important question, not just for water supply, but also for tourism, for manufacturing, for the rest of the economy. So that's another issue that I will talk about later when I finish this one. Domestic issues, factors are also very important. I think that there's also a need for a social campaign in Tajikistan to make them more aware of the waste and inefficient use of water. One good example is the one that I just mentioned to you about the waste of resources like that. In sustainability issue, we often use 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. So those are the 3 R's which I think can be introduced to in Tajikistan. Not that you do not know about it, is that the local people have to be much more involved, much more aware about the 3 R, so that they do not waste the resources, they can reuse the resources in a different way, and they can recycle that. But you don't have this kind of culture yet here in Tajikistan. You need to live, let's say, in America or Western Europe for you to be aware some of this mentality which is emerging in the advanced countries. But in a poor country like Tajikistan, people here are not aware of this. That's why you have all these trucks. They waste water like that. No one say anything. It's normal. When you see a pipe that leaking, the water keep coming out like this, and the water is coming down all the way to the street. No one say anything. The passerby, they just pass by. They didn't even look. There's nothing. But if you are aware of this kind of issue of sustainability, that is a very serious issue over here. Many people in Tajikistan, especially in the rural areas, do not even have sufficient water. But how can you afford to waste water like that? I noticed the capital is different. The government has focused a lot of resources to keep the capital nice, because it's the capital. I understand that. But Tajikistan is not just about Dushanbe. You have a lot of other places, and you have to pay attention to the other places too. And also the governance issue is another issue. I will not go too much into that, but I just want to mention that government issue here is not very efficient, it's not very effective, and they have to improve that. And I would like also to talk about tourism, and you just mentioned, but before I go into that, I would like to see what you are going to discuss.
Except for tourism, we also have our culture in the face of the folk crafts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about folk crafts. So as a tourist, yes, as a visionary, how do you think, how does the folk craft will help to the country present it in the world scene?
That's also a very interesting question. In fact, I have written many books on art, on the question of beauty, including the visual arts and folk crafts and all that. I think some of the things which are very attractive to tourists when we come to Tajikistan is that the artistic scene is exotic, is different from, for someone like me who come from the West, I'm used to all this kind of Western artistic expression, abstract art, modern art, postmodern art, and all that. But once I come to Tajikistan, all of a sudden I confront the traditional craft here, which is very different, especially traditional in relation to Islam, and also in relation to some of the local geographical and historical heritage. Tajikistan, the Tajiks, they are different from other styles in Central Asia. Tajiks is different in the sense that Tajiks are much more Persian. If you look into the history, here is still used to be part of the Persian Empire. So the history is unlike Kazakhstan, for example. So when the Turkic influence in Central Asia, in the case of Tajikistan, is different. Even though it does have some influence in Central Asia too, that's also very important. But then they left a legacy on the artistic expression. Just very simple. You go to the city center, you go to many places, look at the buildings and architecture. And many of them have a lot of Islamic expression and Turkish too expression. And the Persian too, by the way. So that is the exoticness for a lot of people that come from other countries, especially from the West. Now, I mentioned the West because nowadays many of the tourists around the world, many of them have come from countries which can afford to travel. You don't see too many tourists, let's say, from Central Africa to travel around the world. They are migrants. And you see many tourists nowadays from the West and also now they're from the Far East, Japan, Korea, China too. Now China now become the largest tourist country on earth now. So, and many of them, when they come to this country and see all this kind of expression, that's exotic to them, number one, because many of them are not Muslim, many of them are not Persians, and many of them are not Turkish. So that's your major attractions over here. That's good in a way. You can explore that in the short term, yes, but in the long term, no. Why? Because tourism, it is flexible over time. In the short term, that is exotic to them. But you can increase them up to a certain point. When they say, yeah, we saw this before, what else can you offer? Look at Dubai is a good example. Dubai too, when you go to, nowadays Dubai is a major tourist center in the Middle East. Now, they go to Dubai before, they go to Dubai because they want to see all this kind of Middle Eastern, Arabic, artistic expression, sort of like you are trying to attract the Tajik expression. But after a while, people get used to that and say, what want to offer? Now, Dubai, now because they have the oil money, now they build all this kind of new buildings, fascinating attraction, amusement parks, and all these kind of very tall buildings to attract. Now it's not such about Arabic, but it's more about modern attraction. They have the money to do it. Many people go to Dubai not just because they want to look into the Arabic, Middle Eastern artistic expression. They want to see some of the very modern architecture, buildings, parks that Dubai has spent all this money to build. Maybe in the longer term, Tajikistan too have to think long term. Just like people now, they go to China, go to Japan. Sure, they want to see the Chinese traditional art and all that. But now that you go to Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, you see a lot, some very modern, very up-to-date, even post-modern artistic expression. So it's not so much about the ancient Chinese anymore. It's more about very modern. Look at Shanghai, Beijing, Tokyo. You have some very, very interesting nightlife, artistic, I mean, all these things are urban planning, architecture. They are very modern. Since now people go there, take a picture with that, not with a Great Wall. Well, that is ancient wonder, fine, but you need more than that for the longer term. So yes, you're right about all this folk craft in the short term. In the longer term, you have to make them more sustainable in the longer term. You need more for them. Yeah. But then again, where's the money? I mean, it costs money for you to build all this. Now, in the case of Dubai, because they have oil money, there's an oil producer. Over time, they have a lot of petrol dollars. They have a lot, tons of money for them to buy this, fine. Tajikistan also have a lot of mineral resources, by the way, that you can export and pay for that, by the way. So it will take time. In the case of China or Tokyo or Japan or South Korea, because they are high development, and over time they have a lot of supplies that they can use to develop themselves. So each country has a different history, different reason for them to come up with the money to pay for all this. Tajikistan too. You also have a lot of very good resources. In fact, even right now in Tajikistan, look at the economy. The agricultural export, especially cotton, is a major one. And then you have the aluminum production. That's also very important too. And I even mentioned about migration, immigration to Russia and some other countries. A huge part of the Tajik economy is based on remittances that people send back. Look in Dushanbe here. Dushanbe, you see a lot of houses, sometimes you get a lot of cars. How can people pay for all this? Well, because the mother, the father, sister, friends, whatever, the family somewhere working in Russia or in some other country, they send back money over, even though they don't have a job here, but they can still pay for all this. So that is very important. But again, that is not sustainable in the long term, because nowadays many of the migrants in Russia now is under sanction by the EU and the US. So the Russian economy is also now facing another problem. Many of those migrants sooner or later cannot send back a lot of money anymore. And you will see that shock soon, coming to Tajikistan soon. What is the solution? Well, what Russia is doing and what the local people are doing too is that more and more China will become the major source of economic development in this region. Because they are next to you, they have the comparative advantage. Even Russia now is more and more dependent on China, the Chinese economy. So there's another solution to that, and then maybe that can help you to pay for it. Because sooner or later, all those migrants, they have to come home. And when they come home, how can they find a job? So you have to go beyond water supply, go beyond tourism to fund all these people so that they can work and contribute. And that's a long-term problem.
So now we follow that not all the citizens graduates of the schools, they want to study here. They want to study in other countries, but when they graduate there, they didn't come back to develop their country. I don't know why. So it's not our thing today.
That is also a very important question that you just mentioned, because this is not a problem unique in the case of Tajikistan. This problem is called in economics and sociology the brain drain problem. This is a problem which has confronted a lot of underdeveloped or developing countries. People go to the advanced countries to have an education. When they finish the education, they do not go back. They stay in the advanced countries so that it's easier for them to find a job. Now, in a way, there's a waste of money and resources for the poor countries because they spend all this money to send their children to go to this school and all that. Education. Hopefully, they will come back and help the country, but they don't. Many of them, not all of them. And then they benefit the host countries because those are the rich countries. They don't need you anyway, but you go there anyway, and then you go there and help them. And in the end, have some resentment toward you because they think that you're the migrants, so you take away a job from them. But on the other hand, the good news is that over time, this is become less and less because I started this problem before. I have written a book on migration before too, and I noticed that. Let me give you one example. In America, there are a lot of people that come to America each year. More than 90% of those people do not stay in America for a long term. They may stay for a few weeks, for a few months, maybe for a few years, for whatever reason, they want to get a job, whatever. But sooner or later they go back to their country. Not right away, but some of them go back soon, some of them go back a bit later. But all of them, many of them go back because they discover that there is a human nature too. Have you ever heard the expression, sweet home? Your home in the end is the sweet home. You can go outside. Some people will adopt the new country as their home, and the new country fine. But the majority of them still think their own country is still the sweet home. That's where your food, your festival, your network, you name it, all many other things make you as a citizen, as a cultural object of a certain country. So many of them do not stay. They go home because sooner or later you will discover it's not easy for you to think you are a member of the country because you do not grow up there. And sooner or later you notice that, yes, in terms of money, job, you may have a good benefit, but on the other hand, there are a lot of costs. So I think that's part of human nature. I look at China now. In the older days, let's say a few decades ago, China sent a lot of Chinese students to the US to study. But many of them now are returning to China. Why? Because China now is the dominant economy in the world, surpassing the US in 2014. I'm not just, as I said, look at Japan. In the older days, Japan sent a lot of Japanese students to Europe, to America to study, and many of them did not go home, they stayed. You know what? Things are also reversing. Many of them now go back to Japan. So it is not permanent. You go through a cycle. At the beginning, yes, many of them will go. But look at the migrants that you have now in Russia. How many of them do you think they are going to stay in Russia forever? No. I tell you now, many of them are coming back home soon because of the problem in Russia. So things will go up and down like this. Don't think that is permanent. That's my good news, but also bad news in a way, but they are which angle that you look into.
Okay, yes. So thank TV viewers?
Well, the last word is probably the one that we have not yet talked about. Maybe I take this opportunity to talk about too, is that we also need to look into the question whether, let's say, tourism is a good thing for Tajikistan. I do think that in the longer term, the answer is no. I think that your development, if you become too dependent on tourism, you will not go very far to your economy, to your well-being. So yes, you can develop tourism, but remember, use time also to diversify, to focus on some other way to develop manufacturing, for example, maybe for direct investment to do something, so that you do not need to over dependent on tourism, because tourism also has a cost. The more tourists that you have, the more damage to the environment that you have in the longer term. Tourists, when they go to visit the mountains, fine, but they also leave a lot of trash. Each time they walk to the mountains, you talk about millions, thousands of tourists walking on the mountain. Over time, you have a negative impact on the environment too. Okay, it depends on what they do. So don't think that it's cost-free. It costs you a lot too in the longer term. So do not, and also tourism is not unlimited. You are also competing with some other countries too. So the more other countries are attracting a lot of tourists, the less you may have for the same tourists. So in the longer term, you may want to diversify and see what other thing you can do to improve your economy. So people who depend a lot on tourism often are the poorest countries. And people who are very advanced are often countries which do not depend too much on tourism. Look at China, look at Japan. They have a huge tourism too, but the majority of the economy is not about tourism. It's about manufacturing, for example, service-oriented. So it's another thing for you to think about whether tourism is your last word, by the way. For the economy, my answer is no. You have to go beyond tourism, but I think that's for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, some minutes ago, you told that we should talk another issue. Yes, another question about Tajikistan. So maybe it's the time to talk about it.
Yes, because the conversation so far has been focusing on water supply and tourism. I think the two are related. And we just assume in the question that that's a good thing to have tourism, that's a good thing to have more water supply. And I mentioned to you at the beginning that question, there are two questions really. Yes. One question is that whether it's good to have more water supply and more tourism. If it is, what we can do about it. And the second question is that if it's not necessarily good, then maybe we should think twice about pursuing tourism more. That is the second question that I have in mind. We haven't spoken about this yet. Maybe it's time to talk about this. Now the second question in your question is whether tourism and more water supply for consumption is necessarily a good thing. My answer is no. It is good in a certain way, but it's bad in another way. Let's talk about, let's say, water supply first and then tourism again too. As I said, the more water supply that you produce, the more stress it will put on the environment. Especially now under the ideology of capitalism. Consume more is good. You have to consume more. The more you consume, the more burden you will have on nature. The earth is not unlimited in terms of natural resources. You only have so much. Even though some of the energy sources are renewable, like solar energy and water, but water is certainly a major problem here. So in the longer term, you need to think in terms of sustainability of the water supply, not just to keep consuming, bringing more water, and it will also create some problems with your neighbors. The problem that you are facing now is that Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan are also competing with the same water supply in the region. This is the same problem in North Africa, about Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. They are competing for the same water supply, the limited water supply, and many of them are even threatening each other, trying to go to war for that. And because of the dam that Ethiopia has created, and also some other countries, and the water flow from Ethiopia all the way to Sudan and Egypt. So whatever one country does, it has an impact on the other countries. So they have been fighting about this, arguing about this. Now the same problem in Central Asia. Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan are arguing, talking about what should we do about the water supply. So the more you use your water supply, then they will get mad at you because it can affect the supply too. So there are many different problems, and also you need to ask the question how much more human the population increase that you want to have in Tajikistan. I mean, how much more population do you want before they reach a point where the burden, the stress on the local resources become a major problem? Then you have the overpopulation problem. And you also have to look at the question about urbanization. It's another driving force to use more and more water. And we have to ask ourselves, how big the city do you want to expand further and further and continue like this? Before up to a certain point, then you face the issue of sustainability. And then you face the question about a huge burden on nature, on the environment again. You spend everything that you do in the end is also connected with nature too, because the water comes from nature. So you have to look into nature and see how much they can give you. Not that you keep asking, give me more, I'm going to get more. Yeah, but is that sustainable? That is the larger issue, by the way. This question is also related to tourism. It's the same problem. The more tourists you have, the more damage they can do on the environment. Look at Egypt. Egypt, they have the pyramids, right? It's nice. A lot of tourists come to Egypt each year to look at the pyramid. Me too, I was there. So, but now many of the tourist sites for the pyramids and many other attractions, they are broken down now. Why? Because the tourists come there so many times, so many of them each year. You step on that, you step on that, you step on that, you step on that. Think about how many times you step like this each year, millions of them. Over time, wow. The earth is feeling the pressure here. Many of the pyramids, by the way, is getting old, and people sometimes sabotage or damage, and it's nice, it's so nice. Even though you're not supposed to touch, sometimes they even enter, the security is not looking at me, so I enter. You have a lot of violation. So over time, nature is feeling the impact of tourism. Bang, 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 bang. Wow. Understand me? The earth can feel the impact of the human pressure. And many of them throw away some trash. There are some campers. They have a camp. Backpackers, they have a camp. They eat all this food, they can, or the water. I mean, sometimes you have all this kind of trash all over the mountains, all over those pyramids. People are eating too. And some of them they have to clean up, but the cleanup is not 100%. So each year, more tourism, well, you can earn some money, but there's a lot of cost on the environment now. Think about all this cost. Do you want more on that? Maybe next time, before you say more, you look into the mountains, the water, and see how it has impacted you. Now, Egypt they have been trying to protect the pyramids from tourist destruction or negative impact. You see that there is some other issue that is that sustainable? So my answer is in the long term, no. You have to do something else. That's why Dubai and some other countries now, they are creating something else to attract tourism. Not just going to the same old way, but then when they do the new things, you also have to look at the same issue to have a sustainability. So maybe in the long term, you need to diversify your economy and not so much dependent on tourism, because that is going to have a huge impact on the environment. And maybe do some manufacturing, maybe do some service industry. Even the tourism is part of the service sector, but there are some other things you can do, like finance, education, healthcare, insurance, banking. I mean, I'm just giving you some other options, not that tourism, because that's the only thing that you know what to do. It's time to go beyond the mindset and say there are many other things that you can do, not just tourism, because they have a negative impact, not just on the water supply, but also on the nature, the beautiful nature that you have, even the cultural heritage. The more they go to Bukhara, after 20 years, Bukhara will suffer some of the same damages. And many other countries, look at the Great Wall in China. You have millions of people go to China each year, not just the Chinese foreigners. They want to see the Great Wall. Instead of the Great Wall, now the Great Wall, some parts are already broken down. Because you have to spend money. So this is one question that I think that the local people need to look at, and is that sustainable in the longer term? My answer is no. And there are solutions, but you need to look into those solutions that I just mentioned. And again, the foreign direct investment, I think that's a good source, because sooner or later, and you will see the driving engine of economic growth in this region will be from China.
Okay, I think we can finish our conversation. Good. So, okay, thank you, Mr. Baofu, for your colorful conversation with us. Welcome once again here. And do you have something to say?
No, I think that I should reserve the last word to you, because you are the host. I have said too much already.
Okay, so now, dear viewers, our talk show, our conversation is going to end. Thank you for your attention, and see you